Welcome everybody for this Friday morning meeting, Ensuring Impact Guide to Effective Setup and Follow-up of Citizen Participation, the launch of the guidelines document that FIDE Europe and Bertelsmann Stiftung have now published for the network of citizen participation and deliberation in Europe. I'm Yves de Jager, I'm the Executive Director of FIDE Europe, and I will host the meeting today. Just to quickly tell you what's coming for those of you who haven't seen the agenda. So first of all, Dr. Dominic Hirleman of the Bertelsmann Stiftung will tell us a bit what brings us here, what the network is about that has collaborated on these guidelines. Then Dr. Angela Yan from the Bertelsmann Stiftung will tell us a bit what's in the guidelines. And then we have two case studies that will illustrate a bit what this work is about in their concrete day-to-day practice. We'll have Tobijn de Graauw, who has been the program lead on the Dutch Climate Assembly that has just finished. And then we will have Timo from the State Ministry of Baden-Württemberg, telling a bit about their citizen assembly and how that worked. We will have some time of Q&A from the room, and then we have the honor of having the former Prime Minister of Greece, Mr. Papandreou, who will give some reflections on this topic, but who of course is also now the General Rapporteur for Democracy of the Council of Europe, and so will speak in that capacity. And then we will hopefully close on time in 75 minutes after a very engaging meeting. So to give us a bit of an insight of what the network is about and why we are here, I first of all give the floor to my friend and colleague, Dominic Hirleman. Dominic, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Many thanks, Yves, and good morning to all of you. Welcome. So my family wouldn't believe me that a launch event on guidelines for citizen participation brings together that many people. But of course, my family, they don't have a clue how attractive guidelines can be, especially when we're talking about the setup and the follow-up phase of citizen participation. Great that you're all here, not doing Christmas shopping, at least not visibly. And in this Christmas spirit, my role is also Holy Trinity-like. The Holy Trinity of welcome, thank you, and why on earth are we here? So welcome, I did that already, but I want to reframe it a bit differently. So it is important that experts, public officials, politicians interested in citizen participation come together and discuss even more how citizen participation can be improved. Why? Of course, there's the obvious reason that citizens feel alienated from political processes, that we need to bring them in. But I believe there is more. In the past years, so we've seen that new forms of citizen participation, they've developed and they were seen by more and more people as a kind of no-brainer, an easy gain even. And in a way, it was a fast-selling item, perhaps not always when it comes to practical projects, but at least at a communicative level. But what I'm observing these days is something else. It is a shifting political narrative. We are moving away again from an input perspective to a mere output perspective. What do I mean by that? What I hear more and more often is that politicians, journalists, academics, and think tankers say citizen participation is nice, but what counts in the end is that we deliver better railway systems, roads, functioning schools and hospitals. And of course, so that is the ultimate aim, and that's why we have policies that serve the people. But in democracies, policies are most effective when they are supported by the people, and they gain that support when people have had the opportunity to contribute beforehand. This is not just our conviction here. We see it every day in practice. So why on earth are we here? This is exactly the reason. Citizen participation is key. We are focusing on new forms of citizen participation. And there is a lot of guidelines out there on how to organize and conduct such processes. But the guidelines we're discussing today were created because participation processes often fail not during, but before and after citizens meet. So clear guidance on how to initiate these processes effectively is needed, and how to maximize the value of the results. And in both phases, public officials are key, quite obviously in the planning phase, but also in the follow-up. It is about upholding accountability, transparency. It is about trust and democratic processes. So we need to ensure a genuine follow-up. And follow-up, that means integrating the results into policy making, ensuring that citizens' input is acknowledged and, of course, ultimately acted upon. And this is why we want to shed more light on these critical phases. And this is also why we believe we're filling a gap here. These guidelines were developed in discussion with the Network for Citizen Participation and Deliberation in Europe. Bertelsmann Stiftung and FIDE initiated the network. It brings together experts from diverse institutions in Europe, working across different levels of governance. And our common goal is to strengthen and institutionalize participatory and deliberative democracy within Europe's representative systems. So have a look at the study, at the guidelines, and you will see who's part of the network. We call it a network of participation pioneers on the front line of democratic innovation. And it is really a network of public officials, because we see there is a greater need for exchange, for joint quality standards, but also because many of them, and many of you who are here on the call as well, are still lone fighters within their very own institutions and organizations. And we believe that mutual support is needed. So thank you all for your commitment. And finally, a very big thank you to the teams of FIDE and my colleagues at the foundations who were holding the pen, pondering about graphs and text boxes, and who made this all possible. Thank you that you're here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Back to you, Yves.
Thank you very much, Dominic. And I think I remember a few years ago when we actually discussed the need for, like you say, civil servants working in their own institutions and to be able to connect. And it's so great that this network is up and running, and we have now this document to present some of the work of it. To present a bit what is in the guidelines before we have our three guests that will present their work, and Mr. Papandreou to reflect on it, I give the floor to my colleague and friend also, Dr. Angela Jahn, to present some of the guidelines. The floor is yours, Angela.
Good morning to all of you. Good morning, colleagues and friends and fellows of in our network. This is how our guidelines look. Ensuring impact was the title that we chose because we wanted to make a statement that only effective setup and a good follow-up of citizen participation can ensure impact. Our guidelines specifically address people in public administrations and on the political level, because there are a lot of internal processes among public administrations that need to be managed well and thought about carefully to support successful participatory projects. With our guidelines, we build on excellent previous work and existing guidelines, like, for example, the OECD good practice principles and also the Council of Europe recommendations on citizen participation. This event today, I just want to mention it, is the actual launch of our publication. So we are very proud that it got ready just a few days back. It is not an actual training, so we don't do a deep dive, but we give a broad overview what the guidelines are about and highlight some key messages. And with that, I start with the key messages. What we want to say and highlight with these guidelines is that participation must be embedded in policy-making structures, and that refers to all three phases: setup, engagement, and follow-up phase of participatory projects. So for citizens' recommendations to matter, participation cannot be an isolated project. It needs clear responsibilities and alignment with the policy cycle, as well as integration into administrative processes so that a follow-up can be guaranteed. What is still important, that has also been highlighted by other guidelines or recommendations, is that transparency, clarity, and accountability builds trust. This is also proven by many studies. But what it needs is a clear mandate that administration needs to have to follow up and set up. It also requires transparent communication. Communication is very often not put up with enough resources and not taken seriously enough, but communication is key, internal as well as external and to the public. The same is for honest expectation management, visible responses to recommendations, so that in the end, when the recommendations are final, that there is response to these recommendations. And these points are really essential for building public trust. So all in all, participation should become a continuous democratic practice. And we and the network, we are working on a cultural shift from episodic and ad hoc projects to permanent and institutionalized citizen participation as a core part of democratic governance in and across Europe. So this is like a first glimpse into the guidelines. We have 23 of them across the 3 phases: setup, engagement phase, and follow-up phase. And as already has been said, we focus on setup and follow-up, and in the engagement phase, we refer to existing guidelines and sources. So in the setup, we mention that the importance of clear goals, the mandate, resources, and so on. So have a look into the guidelines and get an idea what they're about. In the engagement phase, you all know it's about qualified facilitation, expert input, and diverse learning formats. In the follow-up phase, it's really, really important to communicate about the results internally as well as externally and integrate them into policy making. But also the tracking of impact is important. That is the basis for provision of feedback also to the citizens. So all in all, we tried to provide a practical framework for effective and trustworthy participation with these guidelines. We have structured them, each of them starting with questions for critical self-reflection and a clear call to action. So what does the guideline address? We explain why the guideline matters and what are the risks if it's not considered. We also try to give some practical advice how to actually implement it. We explain practical steps, methods, and give recommendations. For example, who should be involved in the relevant step. And additionally, Yves also already mentioned some text boxes. We try to give focused best practice examples directly related to each of the guidelines to illustrate ways of implementation that has already been proven. So these are just a few examples of the guidelines. Have a look yourself. So for example, guideline 4, what is the scope and authority of the participation process? This is the question for self-reflection. Then the call to action is define the mandate of the process to guarantee the effectiveness and accountability. This is the call to action, so you can actually think what measures to be taken to reach that. And in total, we have a few more setup guidelines, then some engagement guidelines, just a few follow-up guidelines, and we are still, I think we keep on working on them, but these are the most important ones we found so far. For example, can the participatory impact be monitored in the medium and long term? Because that is what's really, really important to build trust and also to ensure impact. This is a picture of our network. So it was really a common effort to get to these guidelines, and we are really happy to get your questions and feedback, and maybe we do some deep dive sessions in the upcoming year to go deeper and go more into detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you. So, as said, we have 2 case studies for this webinar, for this meeting, to illustrate some of the hard work to be done before and after your actual engagement is happening. And I have the honor to give the floor to the first of those 2 speakers, Tobijn de Graauw, who had to plan and deliver a climate assembly at the national level after the commissioning government that actually set it in motion collapsed and disappeared before the first meeting of the citizens. So, Tobijn, the floor is yours for 15 minutes to tell a bit how you try to ensure impact in such a difficult condition. And we know you're a bit sick and you didn't sleep very well, so thank you for still being here. Good luck. Okay, floor is yours.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I'm sorry about my voice. I hope you can follow well. And congratulations on the launch of these guidelines to FIDE and the Bertelsmann Stiftung, and allowing my cracky voice into this space. Indeed, I have been part of the team, the program lead, organizing the Dutch Assembly on Climate. So the question was, how can we as the Netherlands eat, use things and travel in a way that is better for the climate? Indeed, posed by a government that had already collapsed by the time we actually started the preparations. And I would like to show, it's not here. I would like to show a short video. Because when we talk about citizen participation, I find it really important that we bring the voice of the citizens into the space. So I will show another screen, which is this one.
Hi, goedemorgen allemaal. Welkom bij weekend 6.
Het belangrijkste van deze 6e bijeenkomst is dat we het advies echt afmaken met alle aanbevelingen. En zodanig dat we in het najaar het kunnen gaan overhandigen aan het kabinet en aan de Tweede Kamer.
Het is spannend nog steeds, maar wel, je voelt je lekker op je gemak en iedereen is wel goed met elkaar.
Het burgerberaad is bij ons als CE Delft langsgekomen om te vragen van, ja, wij hebben allerlei aanbevelingen, maar wat gaan die eigenlijk opleveren? Hoeveel klimaatvoordeel hebben die eigenlijk?
De impactanalyse geeft ons meer handvaten waar wij nog aan kunnen gaan werken.
Daardoor hebben we beseft dat we op de goede weg zijn.
Verder was men ook benieuwd hoeveel het eigenlijk zou kosten. Want sommige maatregelen kosten geld, andere leveren geld op. Zijn er ook andere aspecten? Sommige dingen zijn vooral goed voor mensen met hoge inkomens, andere voor mensen met lage inkomens. Hoe zit het eigenlijk met, mag het allemaal wel?
Ik vond het wel een hele mooie analyse, want eigenlijk werd ook benadrukt dat we heel goed bezig zijn en dat het best wel impact kan hebben op het klimaat.
We waren heel positief verrast. Hoge kwaliteit, heel interessant, creatief. Er zijn heel veel voorbeelden uit het buitenland gebruikt. Het is ook mooi verdeeld over eten, reizen en spullen. Dus we waren onder de indruk van de kwaliteit van de voorstellen.
We zijn verder gegaan met onze aanbevelingen.
Aanbevelingen zijn tot stand gekomen doordat we in groepjes bij elkaar zijn gaan praten over een van de 4 onderwerpen. Eten, spullen gebruiken, reizen en algemeen.
Ja, er is best een slag gemaakt ten opzichte van wat er lag. Want daar staat bij mij nog best een zorg. Die zorg is nu wel weggenomen.
Je ziet hier 3 cirkels op de vloer. En dan krijgen jullie de kans om in te stappen waar je wil gaan staan.
Het besluitvormingsproces is echt heel bijzonder.
We zijn op dit moment bezig met het stemmen.
Ik vond stemmen heel fijn.
Ik vond het niet moeilijk om een keuze te maken.
Dus we staan in deze cirkels, dus we maken het echt fysiek zichtbaar.
Dus iedereen mag zijn eigen mening volgen.
Vandaag liep ik naar binnen en ik voelde echt, hier zit een burgerberaad die in 6 bijeenkomsten een groep zijn geworden. Heel veel met elkaar hebben meegemaakt en gedeeld en gezamenlijk tot een advies zijn gekomen.
Nou, de eerste keer dat ik er kwam, toen heb ik al gezien dat het echt hele verschillende mensen zijn. Tussen toen en nu is er iets gebeurd en zijn ze een groep geworden. En dat is heel mooi om te zien.
Het kabinet is gevallen. Dat hadden we niet helemaal voorzien natuurlijk.
De kernboodschap aan de ministers was dat we onze plan van aanpak voor de overhandiging van onze adviezen iets hebben aangepast. Dus deze bijeenkomst zou de laatste zijn geweest, maar dat is niet meer. Het is de voornaarlaatste.
Dus we wilden eigenlijk in september overhandigen. Het burgerberaad heeft gisteren besloten om het naar november te tillen.
Het is erg belangrijk natuurlijk dat ze hun aanbevelingen wel kunnen doen op het moment dat de nieuwe Kamer daar ook echt wat mee kan.
Ik denk dat dat goed is en ook verstandig, want dan kan dat advies echt worden betrokken bij de formatie van een nieuw kabinet.
Ik ben heel tevreden over de organisatie, hoe het georganiseerd wordt. Ik sta er zelf versteld van. Ook voor mezelf wat ik in die 6 maanden meegemaakt heb. Ik had echt niet verwacht dat het zover zou komen.
Dat ik die brief op de mat kreeg, dat ik uitgekozen ben, dat ik hier geweest ben, dat is zo'n super cadeautje in mijn leven. En wat heb ik hier veel geleerd.
Het midden in de samenleving is eigenlijk best wel ontzettend groot. Wat hebben jullie van ons nodig om wat wij hier met elkaar beleefd hebben ook in de praktijk te brengen in Den Haag?
Ja, wat ik heel mooi vond net was om van een van de deelnemers te horen die zei: wat ik hier geleerd heb is de waarde van naar elkaar luisteren, van echt naar elkaar luisteren. En ik denk dat we dat veel meer moeten doen.
Aan het begin was het een groep van vreemden en gingen dus gesprekken over het daar en dan. Na Kootwijk vooral ging het veel vaker over het hier en nu. En vanaf dat moment zijn er aan vriendschap gesmeed en dat vind ik mooi.
I was told I'm already running for 6 minutes, so I won't get into the details of this assembly, which is very tempting. We had a group of 175 participants who are a reflection of the Netherlands as a whole. And they came together for 7 weekends during 9 months. And indeed, if you already addressed, so when our new government is formed, this assembly will have, and I think it's the first in the world, will have dealt with 3 cabinets. Let me speak a bit about, so we had these 7 weekends. And then, as you could see in the video, the assembly decided itself to not present and deliver the result of their work to the government, because we had another government collapse in June. It was right before the 6th weekend. And we had an open conversation with the assembly on what to do, and it was up to them to decide. And they made the decision to postpone to have 1 extra meeting, a 7th weekend in September, and then to postpone the presentation until after the elections. And that took place last week on Monday. So that was one of the results of the dealing with a changing government political reality. This is what happened. Eventually on 1st of December. And let me address some of the things we focus on, which is perhaps most relevant to these recommendations. So 23 recommendations in this great paper, and our assembly by coincidence also came up with 23 recommendations, of which 13 received over 75% support from the assembly. The other 10 were also included in their advice as an invitation to society and government and politicians for further dialogue. And we're currently translating the recommendations, so we can share them soon in English as well. So I think part of the things that we were dealing with, I think a great part of this assembly was that it took years of preparation. Cabinet and Parliament both did thorough research into other assemblies that took place on a national level and about the learnings and best practices. And based on that, they agreed on 10 conditions for the assembly. And that was basically our framework in which we organized it. That was a great starting point. Also, they issued or asked an independent platform, which is, so I'm part of them. We organize the assembly from the Physical Environment Consultative Council. So we are an independent platform by law, which allowed also the assembly to be led by an independent chair, which was great because there's so much distrust in science and in government. And it was, I think, very important to make sure that the assembly was able to come up, to run a process and come up with whatever result they wanted to come up with. So I think that was a great decision as well. So we as a secretariat supported the chair in designing and executing the assembly within the conditions that were set by government and parliament. I think a lot of our work went into engaging, and that is most relevant here, went into engaging different stakeholders. So in our government structure, we had a progress meeting with the two ministers responsible for this assembly, the Minister of Interior and the Minister for Climate and Green Growth. And Parliament appointed two rapporteurs for this process. And so it was up to us to design and execute a process, but they were able in these progress meetings based on our rapportage to meet with the chair and the team and to see whether we were still meeting the conditions that they set. And it allowed us to engage them closely in the process. The ministers and the rapporteurs also visited the first and the last meeting. And then, of course, we tried to invite and engage as many politicians as possible because, as I said, we were already dealing with a new government who basically hadn't asked for this assembly. So what we did was reach out to all the relevant ministries. It was quite a challenge. We had 3 huge topics in our, and the topic of climate in our remit. And we reached out to all the political leaders of all the different political parties and all the members of the relevant committees. From day one, as soon as we had the chair appointed, we tried to build personal relationships, tell them about the process, invite them to share suggestions for experts who they felt were important for the assembly to talk with, field visits that could be relevant, so also for them to give input. Unfortunately, not many politicians were able to actually visit the meetings, and you know that if they're there, they can see that it's actually their constituencies also in these in the assembly. We had a quite far-right government that we were dealing with while we were executing the assembly, which was a bit challenging. They were not in support of climate policy and also not in support of the instruments. So we were hoping that they would visit. That didn't work. So at some point we thought, let's go to, if they don't come to us, we'll go to them. So we took a group of around 30, I think, members of the assembly, and we visited Parliament, and we had we actually asked permission to change their setup, their committee setup, and we gave them an hour of an experience of the way we enter into dialogue in the assembly. So they had to sit between the different members of the assembly, and they were just part of a very different conversation. And that was great. And they thought they could see, this is actually the Netherlands in small, and we should have, many of them said, we should change our way of working together, perhaps based on this. The same goes for engaging civil servants, because they're the ones who are the policymakers who then eventually have to write up and deal with implement the recommendations. So we worked very closely with a civil servants working group composed of members of 8 different departments, from finance to climate to to infrastructure all the relevant topics. So on that level, they helped provide and advise us on relevant knowledge that the assembly meters could need. Yes, and I see the time going. And we also, and we met with civil servants also on the highest level. So to engage them through the process, made sure relevant knowledge was fed into the process, and then so that they now are already closely engaged now that they have to take over and start implementation. I think one other element that I would like to highlight is the process design. It's critical. So we had a clear framework, and we thought very well about what is it, what is the result, what is the harvest that we want to achieve, and at the same time we made sure that we could work very iteratively based on theory, deep democracy, other principles, and from the start. And now in the follow-up phase, I think it's good to mention that that we will stay together for 1 more year. So the assembly, the chair and a very small secretariat will support the assembly in monitoring the follow-up. It's a part of the established the installment of the assembly that the new government or the current one has to respond within 6 months. And then Parliament has committed itself to then have a debate about the advice and the government's response. And at the same time, because we know that we can't depend only on the political follow-up, we invest a lot in coalition building. We did this from the start and throughout the process. So there is a recommendation about aviation. So we're talking to the relevant coalitions and tables that are already addressing these topics to make sure that the recommendations also land in society. And I think my time is up, so I'll stop here.
Thank you, Tobijn. We know we asked you a horrible thing to present in 15 minutes an almost 2-year process with 3 cabinets intervening at the same time. But there's time for questions after the next presentation, so you can raise your hand if you have questions for Tobijn later. Now I'll quickly move on to Timo Peters, who works at the State Ministry of Baden-Württemberg and will present some work they've done at the regional level in Germany, also with an assembly on school time. Timo, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yves, and hi to everyone on the call. And thank you very much, first of all, to FIDE and Bertelsmann Stiftung. It's really great to have now the guidelines. I brought in my insights too, and it's great to see what is the outcome. Yeah, and thanks for having me, because I work in citizen participation for 15 years now, and I'm the process that I'm presenting now is probably the one that has the most impact. And we talked about impact before. I want to talk about the regional assembly on the duration of high school in Baden-Württemberg. First of all, just if you don't know where Baden-Württemberg is, it's in the southwest of Germany. It's known for Porsche and Mercedes-Benz, but it's also known for a big conflict over a train station 15 years ago. And this train station actually make the whole public administration more sensitive to citizen participation, especially the prime minister himself said, put up politics of being heard. So he really is his strategy to implement public participation into decision-making here in Baden-Württemberg. And in 2023, we had a citizen initiative putting up an issue of the length of the high school. They put it on the table. So it's really interesting that the civil society brought up the topic that we were talking about, because in the coalition treaty, it said that the coalition doesn't want to change anything in the school system. That was what they agreed on. And they said, okay, the next 5 years throughout the coalition phase, we don't want to change anything. And the citizens weren't satisfied with that. And the initiative brought up the question, because they're saying our kids are to focus on school. They don't have any free time. They are mentally and physically on a huge burden. And we want to change that. We need to return to 9 years of high school. It was changed in 2009 to 8 years. And they said, okay, this was a wrong decision and we need to return to 9 years. And they strived for a referendum. So they were collecting signatures to have a referendum, to have a vote on the question if we want to, as Baden-Württemberg, want to return to 8 or 9 years. And the Prime Minister himself said, okay, this is too easy. Yes or no is not the answer. As you all know, mostly the truth lies between yes or no. And so he said, okay, why don't we, before we have a referendum, why don't we ask the citizens? And he agreed to have a citizen assembly. And I think this is one thing. We have a political culture of citizen participation, and we have the Prime Minister himself standing behind this whole process. And I think this is a huge aspect if you want to go into citizen assembly. And if you want to have an impact, you need to have a political figure that is standing behind that. And in our case, we had also had a clear mandate for the citizen participation process. It was the question, do we as Baden-Württemberg want to return to 9 years of high school? It's a very concrete question. It is a concrete something that I think the only topic is soccer, where everybody can talk with, is also the educational system, where everybody has an opinion and can talk about it. So we had a huge public awareness about that. I think this was really an advantage for us. So everybody was really discussing and also in private about this topic. And luckily, we had, as I said, we have a long history of public participation process. So we already had established governance of this. We have a state ministry where I'm working is the political leader of this process. We have an agency now that is running all these processes, and we also have an agency, the Alliance for Civil Society, who's promoting all that. So we have a clear governance that was also put in place here to run this citizen assembly. And another thing that is really important to have, and that we built over the last now 14 years, is that we have 4 clear phases if we're running a citizen assembly. It's what we call the Beteiligungsscoping. It's a participatory scoping where we have all the facts, all the arguments, all the positions of people who are discussing it are put together. So we're working with a topic issue, with the mind mapping, where all the topics are put together. That is especially important because, as I said, there's not only one argument to it or against it. There are many aspects you need to filter and you need to outweigh. And I think that is something that in the Beteiligungsscoping and in the mind maps that we are building up is coming out. Also, the Beteiligungsscoping is something, and Tobijn also talked about it, to get involved the stakeholders. One rule is when we do citizen participation is that the stakeholders are against civic participation. They don't like random selection. They don't like to have people coming out of the public to talk about to give recommendations. And so we need to get these, especially in the educational system. I had to learn that there are strong organizations, there are strong stakeholders with strong opinions. And we had to get them on board because it's concerning the legitimacy of this whole process. It's important that the stakeholders are standing behind it and not in conflict with our process. So that we did that during the first step. In the second step, we did an online consultation. As I said, everybody can talk about the educational system, has an opinion about it. So we did an online consultation asking the public, okay, what do you think about the discussion of 8 or 9 years? And this is really important because in the end, the recommendation need to have a public opinion or should meet the public opinion. This is especially important for the politicians, that they say, okay, we have got 60 citizens, but how can decide on 12 million people who are living here in Baden-Württemberg? So we did an online consultation with one of the biggest results. We had more than 10,000 comments and insights. And then this third step, the citizen assembly took place, and I think I'll do that. Yeah, here you can see we had the unions, the stakeholders on board. We had the online consultations with 13,000 reactions and 1,000 comments. And then we put up the Citizen Assembly. We do that randomly selected and from all areas of Baden-Württemberg on all ages, gender, equality, and so. And they met for 5 times. They had hearings of experts, school teachers, parents, and students, and they really had to weigh out the arguments. And in the end, they came up with 53 recommendations. And because it was a clear mandate, the first recommendations were concerning the return to 9 years. They recommended to return to 9 years, but they also, and that is really something when that is interested, if you're a politician, it's not only about yes or no, it shows how many aspects you need to filter. They said, yeah, we should return to 9 years, but that's not the key question concerning the mental load that students have to face today. It's about social media. It's about all the activities that the society demands from them. It's about peer pressures. It's about, do we have the right lessons? Do we teach the right stuff? For example, they recommended to have more media education and get more into technical lessons and so. So they said, yes, we should return to 9 years because it gives the students more time. But if you do that, it's not the only questions. You have to look into more issues. So, and we talked about the follow-up phase on the bottom left. You can see my boss. She's a member of cabinet. She was really handed over the recommendations. So it's really important that citizens dialogue process is handed over the recommendations so that they are taken seriously by the recommendations, that the government takes the recommendations seriously. She brought it into the cabinet. And on the bottom left, you can see the Citizen Assembly talking with the Minister of Education about the results. So that she herself was in interaction with this with the assembly. And on the bottom right, you can see the Prime Minister. And yes, they were, although himself, the Prime Minister said we should stay with 8 years, he followed the arguments of the Citizen Assembly, and the whole cabinet did. And a few weeks or a few days after the handing over of the recommendation, they said, okay, we're going to return to 9 years. We follow the recommendations because they are well outweighed. It was a good process with a lot of hearings, a lot of arguments were taken into account. So, and of course, we talked about transparent, and I think I made it clear that it was a topic that there was a lot of discussion here in Baden-Württemberg. So we had the task to make it as transparent as possible. We had the website up. We had a lot of media attention. We had a lot of talks in the media about that. We explained our way of doing Citizens Assembly in Baden-Württemberg. We're doing it always the same way, so that it was not something that we added for this topic so that the outcome was clear. No, we're doing it on the same. This procedure is the same all the time, and luckily, and that is something. It was a clear outcome. It was the politicians followed the outcome, and we luckily had the media was having opinion polls set up on the recommendations, and a lot of people in Baden-Württemberg said it's okay. It really demands or it follows our ways of how we should deal the issue. So also public opinion agrees with the result, and so it made it, of course, easier for the politicians to follow it. But it shows, on the other hand, also that a citizen assembly of 60 people can really represent the way the whole bunch of people out there is thinking about an opinion about a topic. So in the end, the parliament had to decide on it, and they followed also the recommendation. There was a lot of discussion about the Citizen Assembly, of course, in parliament too. But luckily, I mean, they didn't follow in the first place all the 53 recommendations. That was never the expectation that we put up. But in the end, and we are now 1.5 years after the assembly, we can say that 75% of the recommendation were somehow was implemented also in other legislations, because now we have a new media subject now implemented, and so we can say it really convinced the politicians to in a conflict situation to have a decision, and this is always what we are striving for, that the Citizen Assembly is helping the politicians or the parliament to decide on a very conflict topic that we had here. And in the end, everybody was, the whole conflict was flattened. And so. And last thing I wanted to mention is about trust. We have now 14 years of politics of being heard. And we can say that from scientists, they say we have a lot of trust, or more trust in government than other Bundesländer. We have a lot of, the satisfaction with democracy here in Baden-Württemberg is higher than in other Bundesländer. And it's the result of the politics of being heard. So on the long run, it can also strengthen trust in democracy and politician administration. Yeah. And I think, last thing, because it's always the resources, we have a little bit around 200,000 euros put into it, and we have a unit that is doing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Timo. And maybe also good to remind that our network tries to meet in person twice a year. And one of the first meetings was actually, I would say in Baden-Württemberg, but it was a representation in Brussels. So still longing to come and visit you at some point there. But so you've already hosted one of the meetings too. So now there's a time for Q&A. So I see there's 2 questions in the Q&A and there's one hand raised. I'll start with the question from Iñaki Goni, who was the first to ask a question. It's for Tobijn. I don't know if you saw it, Tobijn. I was very interested in the behind-the-scenes work of coalition building. This is often overlooked. Could you tell us a bit more about what you've learned regarding persuading actors to consider those recommendations? Did this process begin before or after the recommendations were identified? What aspects did you find challenging? Long, multi-pronged question. Tobijn, can you give us some thoughts on that?
Yes, perhaps. So I think my learning is that as from the start, you engage as many stakeholders as you can, because the sooner you do, the more they feel engaged and they feel the process is also theirs. One of the challenges in that regard for us was that our climate assembly was about 3 huge fields, was around food, mobility and circular economy. So how do you, which is also why I wasn't able to compose like a stakeholder group, because how do you get representatives, or which companies or which civil society organizations from these huge fields do you then bring together? So that was a challenge, but then the only way was to engage with them on an individual level. And it was difficult for many of them to be actively engaged, especially companies or civil organizations, on the specific topics throughout while the assembly was still running, because of course they said, like, I don't know what, it depends on the actual outcomes. But I think it helps a lot if you then engage them or ask them to provide input or provide knowledge or make suggestions, whereas at the same time we really made sure that the assembly was in charge. So the assembly members themselves selected which experts they wanted to talk to, what kind of knowledge they wanted to receive. and then the coalition building. So now we can start. So in the running up to the final presentation and the launch of the advice and report, we were able to reach out to many different stakeholders, tell them like this is coming up, and we invited them to be there for the actual presentation to experience and engage with the members of the assembly directly. And have a conversation with them about it. And now we are working on, so in the coming months and the coming years, setting up actual exchanges with assembly members and these different stakeholders in the different coalitions or appropriate setups to talk about the recommendations. So to facilitate a conversation so that they can take it forward.
Okay, thank you, Tobijn. Fascinating work. I think Hannah van Belle was then next. You have a question about the guidelines themselves, or do you have a question for the speakers? Floor is yours.
Yeah, for both the guidelines, I mean, all three of them, but I will direct it to the speakers. Thank you for your contributions. I was working with Agora Brussels on the Brussels Citizens Assemblies for a long time, and it was also an interesting experiment. And for us, inclusion was very important to keep people engaged because we worked with different quota, like educational level, age, all of that. And I was wondering where in the engagement phase and maybe also in the setup phase, inclusion had maybe a place in your assembly, because in our experience, if we don't include enough, we are left with just a certain type of demographic, and then we wondered how representative our recommendations still were. So I wonder what place this has or had in your assemblies.
Okay, Timo or Tobijn, you wanna? Timo, you take it first.
I will start. The question that we're asking before we start a citizen assembly is how many quotas we can actually meet, and we keep more or less to the standards, saying okay, equality of sex and equality. Mostly the age gaps, so from starting with 16 until I don't know 99 or whatever. So and we're saying okay, different educational levels, and we try to meet them because 60 people is not a lot. So and we try to meet these three quotas. In some special assemblies, we ask ourselves if it's a regional quota is important, like something coming from the north, coming from the south or so. But I would recommend always not to take too many quotas. The more the quotas you want to meet, the harder it gets to actually represent it in a special scale. So, and that's why we're working with 3 to 4 quotas for every citizen assembly. And we can meet them in the end. That is a big success.
Thank you, Timo. I'll first take some questions within the time we have, Tobijn, and then we. Nora, you have a question about the guidelines, Europe, how they were developed. They were. I'll answer that maybe myself because we did a lot of work on them together with Bertelsmann. We did this. Actually, we worked almost 2 years on these. We kind of connected with all the members in the network and collected feedback from them. And we based a lot of the work on their experiences. How it's ensured at the European level, we kept the guidelines in a way that they're actually generic in some ways, not specific to deliberation. The two cases here are deliberation. Of course, we do look at citizen participation that is ambitious and engaging, so not some quick 1-hour process or something. But we have several members who work at the European level in the network, both at the European Commission, at the Joint Research Center, at the Council of Europe, the OECD, so people who work at the above national level. So I would say please take a look at them, mail us if you still have some questions. Then I will hand the floor again to Tobijn. quickly from Maria Jagacek. Maria, who works at the Polish Parliament and is also a member of the network. You said it took years to initiate the assembly and bring together decision makers, years when political and power people in charge could change. They did change. How did you eventually manage it? What was the final spark? It seems a huge job. Could you maybe, was there some, in short, some spark, some things that you can remember that really made it shift?
In terms of arriving at the actual installment of the assembly, you mean? Okay. I think eventually it's up to political will. We had a Minister of Climate who now was actually won the elections in this round. He was at the time the Minister of Climate, and he said, yeah, and there had been researchers, and there was a committee that also made a recommendation that that it would be good to strengthen representative democracy through establishing citizen assemblies, and that climate would be a good topic for a first one. And then there was political will with this minister and the Minister of Interior to say, okay, let's do it, let's try it. And eventually it was, I think, a good. Some people did great lobby, and there was political will to actually start.
Okay, thank you very much, Tobijn. And then I have, I think, a last question, also looking at the time, from Mirto in the chat. I'm wondering if there's any specific words of advice for new initiatives in countries not used to citizens' participation in practice or in culture and mentality. Maybe Timo, you can take this maybe from a perspective of a civil servant, because part of the guidelines talks also about how to get civil servants, for example, who are not used to this or might be reluctant in the beginning in departments engaged in this.
Thank you, Yves. I will look onto that. I think it's when the executive is running a process, you have the first step we always do is bringing the departments in. So we're doing a project group with a responsible civil servants from the department that is in charge. And of course, we are facing a lot of doubt. We are facing a lot of questions. And is there really come as an outcome expected? What is the outcome? Can we calculate it? And so no, you can't calculate it. Trust the process. But we follow. We help you with that. That is also something that I will recommend. You need to have some kind of specialist who's running this citizen assembly to give security and give trust into the process for especially the public servants who are in charge of the topic, and saying, okay, I will help you and I will guide you through this. I think this is really important. That is mostly my job, is to taking people's hand and saying, okay, keep calm, trust the process, and that will be the outcome. And I think this really gives much of trust. And a second thing is talk about the money. Don't have the opinion that Citizen Assembly is for nothing, but it's a good investment. As I try to implement it, there's always a good outcome. It can mediate conflicts, and it will help also a public servant in solving a hard topic that he's facing. So I guess the first step is always to talk to your colleagues.
Thank you, Timo, and thank you, Tobijn, both of you, for your presentations and the Q&A. We unfortunately need to move on. Time is pressing. To Mirto and everybody here in the chat also, please reach out to us or to the Bertelsmann Stiftung. Our mail addresses are on the guidelines. If you have further questions or you want some help, please, we are there for that. It is now my honor to give the floor to Mr. George Papandreou, who is of course, the former Prime Minister of Greece. So we've been talking a lot about politicians here and the need to get politicians on board. But you are here actually in your capacity as General Rapporteur on Democracy of the Council of Europe. But you have so much experience, Mr. Papandreou, you can speak to all these different accounts, I'm sure. Thank you for being here with us. The floor is yours to give some reflections on both the work of the guidelines and the two presentations you just heard. Thank you, Mr. Papandreou.
Well, thank you very much. I was very impressed by the presentations and the work that's being done. So thank you. Congratulations to FIDE and Bertelsmann Stiftung and the practices in Baden-Württemberg and the Netherlands. Very, very interesting. Also, Angela, for your work on the guidelines. I think we would, as a general rapporteur, what I have been tasked to do is to see why we are seeing democracy being undermined, and why are we seeing the erosion of democratic institutions, and then also what are the ways we can rethink democracy to work and build trust for our citizens. And I would say that we need to think of democracy as a whole ecosystem. Sometimes we think of it more as certain institutions, particularly elections, a competition, our parliament, maybe local government, but it is really a much wider ecosystem. And I think we need to approach it that way, because then that's how we can also rethink this ecosystem. And it includes culture, it includes practices, such as the ones you mentioned, of course, institutions, civil servants, parliaments, administration, certain rules, and of course, technologies. So it's a whole ecosystem. Very quickly, some of the problems, I won't get into details, some of the problems we have as politicians, or as politics, or as democracies, if you like, is that one is that we have global problems, but we have local politics. That means sometimes politicians are tasked to solve problems which really they cannot. People think we have more power than we really do. And that also means that there's a complex system. So when I was dealing with the financial crisis, some people said, "Oh yes, it's a Greek problem." No, it was not just a Greek problem. It was a Greek problem for certainly, but it was a Eurozone problem. It was a global problem. It started in New York, in Wall Street. So how do we get cooperation, and also how do we see participative processes across borders? And this is one of the issues which I think at the European level we are discussing now in the Council of Europe. Can we have, as there have been an attempt with the Future of Europe Convention, citizens' assemblies that go across borders? Local is great, national is important, and regional is also very important. A second problem, I think, is the complexity of our times. Complexity means that we have politicians do not have easy solutions, and therefore I think this is important to bring in our citizens for two reasons. First of all, to understand the complexity, but secondly, they are the ones in the end we are supposed to serve. The third major problem of our democracy is the inequality of wealth, which we are seeing growing over the last decades, which also translate into inequality of power. We already have countries which are considered very democratic, such as the USA, which are basically becoming oligarchies, controlled by certain oligarchs, having so much power over our democracies. The digital world, algorithms, they should have been part of our democratic discourse. I mean, the internet should have been a great place for discourse. But the way algorithms are used today, the way they are created, is for profit and not for democracy. And for profit, you get it much better when you get people addicted, when you get people you use fear, hate speech, polarization, and so on. So the representative democracy is under strain. That's why.
Mr. Papandreou, the quality is really bad. We can't hear you at this moment.
I'm sorry about that.
No,
I will send
problem.
my notes.
Thank you, and our apologies. We can't seem to solve this while we're here. Thank you and I heard you in the European Parliament only 2 weeks, so I know what a rousing speaker you can be on the topic. So it's a bit unfortunate this is happening now, but we will re-invite you in the next event we do, and then this happens. My apologies also for us. So actually, this brings us a bit to the end of the event. Also, we have 3 minutes left. Some closing remarks from the side of FIDE and Bertelsmann. So we have put these guidelines together with civil servants, and I like to reiterate the importance of these actors that we've also very much, as Dominic said, try to bring together, and we see the surplus value. Very often we look at NGOs, advocacy organizations, and politicians, but I think I also want to just briefly highlight our members of the network here at the end of this event, who are very often working in not evidence situations. Some are lucky to have institutions that work for them, but some are really trying to fight for this cause within their institutions, struggle against colleagues, and still put up amazing work because they believe in the strength of citizen participation. So as FIDE, we would like to highlight this work and this role through these guidelines and try to emphasize that whilst we did it together with Bertelsmann, this is really a collective product, and it's also a bit of a, let's say, a celebration of the work of all the members we have in that network. And so I want to basically now thank all of them also for always making time for these meetings, revising some of the drafts of this document, because we know you have very, very busy jobs. And so really thank you for your engagement in your job and for your work. Dominic, maybe you want to have a last closing word on behalf of Bertelsmann before we close it off. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to all of you. I guess the closing remark is basically Happy Christmas. I think the work is important that we're doing here. It's the good news is that well, the knowledge of methodologies so it's more widespread these days. But on the other hand, the environment is more challenging. So it's going to be tough in the future. And I fully agree with George Papandreou, who says it's about an ecosystem. So it's not just that we've got to do our own stuff well. So we've got to think about all the other niches as well. So, but we've got to do that jointly, and we stay in touch and hope to see you soon and more often. Thanks.